mentioned earlier, we're kind of reading through Mark together as a congregation during Lent, and I'm choosing certain passages from the gospel that I think reflect the whole of it pretty well, that tell us a bit about who Jesus is and his earthly ministry. So it doesn't necessarily line up with exactly where we are in reading through it, but it'll be fairly close. Our passage for today comes from chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Many years ago, there was a young boy who was growing up in Russia. His name was Anthony Bloom, and Bloom was this really zealous communist, and he was very much opposed to Christianity. He was a pretty cynical child. He had had a pretty difficult life experience for most of his life. He had kind of come to this conclusion that people shouldn't be trusted, and that in order to survive, you just have to fight. You have to hit back when you've been hit. So he's a fairly miserable kid. And so once he becomes a teenager, his family actually moves to Paris, and he starts to attend a boarding school there. And it was there that one day he found himself listening to a priest. A priest was giving a lecture. And the lecture was about why Christianity is true and why everyone should take it seriously. And so he sat there listening to the priest, and he got really stirred up and defiant. It was frustrating him. He left infuriated because of what this priest had said. So he went home and he decided that he was just going to settle it. He was going to try to prove the whole thing wrong, that Christianity could not be true. So he opened his Bible and he searched for what would be the shortest gospel. And he came to this gospel, the Gospel of Mark. And he started reading. And this is what he would eventually write about that experience reading the Gospel of Mark. "I do not know how to tell you of what happened. I will put it quite simply, and those of you who have gone through a similar experience will know what came to pass. While I was reading the beginning of St. Mark's Gospel, before I reached the 3rd chapter, I became aware of a presence. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. There was no hallucination. It was a simple certainty that the Lord was standing there and that I was in the presence of him whose life I had begun to read with such revulsion and such ill will. This was my basic and essential meeting with the Lord. From then I knew that Christ did exist. And from that point on, Bloom lived a life committed completely to Christ. He went on to enter the ministry. He became a well-known preacher. He was a spiritual director. He wrote on the Christian life. And later, Bloom commented that God must have some strange sense of humor, because of the 4 Gospels, Mark is the one most likely to lead to a dramatic conversion experience like this. He chose the shortest gospel because he wanted to get right to the business of showing it all completely fake, all completely untrue. And what he found was that he actually came to the gospel that gets right to the point, right to the heart of who Jesus is and why it matters. Now, as we said last week, Mark is kind of unique in the way it presents the story of Jesus. All of the Gospels are focused on Christ. But Mark is unique because it seems like it's asking the question, who is this Jesus? And in fact, Mark can kind of be read like a mystery story of sorts. Maybe you've caught on to this if you've been reading along during Lent. At the very beginning of the book, the reader is told who Jesus is. And we saw that in our passage last Sunday. After he's baptized, the heavens open up and the Father says, "You are my Son." Now notice that this is a little bit different from the way the Gospel of Matthew presents it. Because in Matthew, the announcement is made to everyone else. In Matthew, the Father says, "This is my Son." In Matthew, the Father's making the announcement to everyone else who's in attendance. But in Mark, the Father is speaking directly to Jesus. The Father's saying, you are my Son. And then we start to follow Jesus through his earthly ministry from that point. And what we find is that no one really knows what to do with Jesus. They don't really know what to make of him. Later in chapter 1, we find Jesus teaching in the synagogue, and he's healing someone who's been possessed. And we find people asking, "What is this?" He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And then later the scribes are found asking, "Why does this fellow speak in this way? It's blasphemy." Others are saying, "We've never seen anything like this." Clearly, throughout Mark's gospel, people are grappling with just who Jesus is. But what's interesting in Mark's gospel is that there's one group who consistently, clearly knows who Jesus is. While others are asking, "Who is this man? Where does his authority come from?" There's one group who's very clear on Jesus, and that's the demons. Consider these two scenes from chapter 3, beginning with verse 7 there in chapter 3. Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers, from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region of Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crush him, for he had cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. Hear this. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, "You are the Son of God." But he sternly ordered them not to make him known. So while others are looking around and saying, "Who is this man? Who is this Jesus?" the demons are always looking at him and saying, "You are the Son of God." people just don't know what to make of it. They don't know what to do with that. And so just a few verses later, what we find is people coming to the conclusion, well, he must be one of them. Starting with verse 19, we read, "Then he," Jesus, "goes home, and the crowd come together again, so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, 'He's gone out of his mind.' And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, 'He has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons he cast out demons.' And he called them to him, and he spoke to them in parables. And Jesus says, 'How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom's divided against itself, that kingdom can't stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house won't be able to stand. If Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come.' And then Jesus says, 'But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered.'" Now, this is an important statement for the passage that we want to look at today. So keep that in mind. As we come back to the passage we read this morning of the Gerasene demoniac, we once again find Jesus facing someone who's possessed. And again, the demons are the ones in this passage, in this scene, who know who Jesus is. Beginning with verse 2. "When Jesus steps out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. This man lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. When he sees Jesus, the possessed man approaches him and bows down and exclaims, 'What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me.'" Let's pause just for a moment. Let's get the big picture here. Jesus has started his earthly ministry. Everyone's wondering, who is this Jesus? Who is this man who's teaching with authority, who's healing people? And now, of course, we know who he is, but everyone else in Mark's gospel is left wondering. And when people start to realize that the demons know who he is, they begin to believe, well, obviously he must be of Satan. He must be one of them. And it's at this point that Jesus says, this can't be so. Satan can't be against Satan. And he offers this image of a strong man. He says a strong man has to be tied up before his house can be plundered. And now here we are in this passage with a man who can't be bound. We're seeing here a possessed man who can't be restrained. No one can contain this man. The passage says they've tried to restrain him. They put shackles on him. They've chained him up, but he always breaks free. You might say that this man could not be tied up. How does Jesus respond? He says, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And of course, the spirit obeys. It does. And Jesus sends the demons out of the man and into the swine, and the man is healed, and the people are amazed. Mark is painting a picture for us of who Jesus is, and we're getting it piece by piece. Here and there we get a glimpse of his authority. Occasionally we see his love for others or the miracles that he's performed. And in this passage, we get a very clear picture of Jesus' power. Because with one command, Jesus heals this man who is possessed. With just one command, Jesus breaks the bondage that this man has been living under. With just one command, Jesus is able to send the demons out from this man's body. With one command, Jesus restrains the one who previously could not be restrained. Hear this. A a strong man, Satan, was present. A strong man had control of this particular possessed man. But with one command, Jesus made clear that he was the one. Jesus was the only one who could bind that strong man and plunder his house. The image becomes clear here. This man who couldn't be restrained, this man who couldn't be contained or chained, possessed by Satan, Jesus makes clear, I am the one who can contain him. I am the one who can bind up those demons that possess him and send them away. Whatever hold Satan might have on this man, it's completely upended when Jesus comes on the scene. This is important. I think it's an incredible reminder for us today. I think it's a blessing for us to read this passage and to know whatever sin we might be facing, whatever stronghold exists in our lives, whatever addiction we might be facing, whatever hang-ups we have, whatever sin we continuously find ourselves falling into. What an incredible reminder that there is one who is stronger than all of that. What a comfort it is to know that the one who is stronger than all of that, the one who can overcome anything, who can bind the strong man, who can plunder his house, he lives in us. Romans 8 reminds us of that truth. It tells us that the same Spirit that rose Jesus from the grave lives in us today. What an incredible reminder for us in this season of Lent. In this time where we're looking inward, where we're considering what's going on inside of us, what sin we might have, what hang-ups we face, what things we haven't surrendered. What a great reminder for us as we do that. There is no sin, no mistake, no hang-up, no thing that is too big for Christ. No thing that he can't also bind up and send out when we give it to him. As we continue in this season of Lent, I want us to continue to have moments of some prayerful reflection. So I invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes for a moment as we reflect on this truth this morning, this story of Jesus setting the man free. Heavenly Father, I come before you now with this in mind. The healing power and authority of Jesus fresh in our minds. We pray that you would show us any sin that exists in our lives today. With this reminder that Jesus is the stronger man. With this reminder that Jesus is the one who binds Satan. Jesus is the one who binds our sin. We pray that you would remove those things from our lives now. Father, in the coming days and in the coming weeks, may we be reminded that your Spirit, that same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, lives in us. You are alive in us. And there is no sin, no hang-up, no thing that we face today that you can't too bind up, that you can't overcome in us. Help us to be reminded of that in the coming days. Strengthen us, O God. continue in this journey through Lent, as we look inward, as we consider ways in which we aren't completely given to you, that we would be reminded that you are greater, you are more powerful, all authority belongs to you. That when we come to you, that you are eager to work in our lives, you are eager to shape us more into the image of Christ, you are eager to help us overcome those sins we have a hard time believing. Thank you for this reminder. Thank you that we get to see Jesus afresh in this season of Lent, and be reminded of his incredible strength. We pray all this today in his name.